Good evening, New Orleans, and welcome to Inside New Orleans Sports. I'm your host, Eric Ashe. Over the next hour, we're going to cover the New Orleans Saints very heavy. Got two great guests for you, as always. Joining us for the first time is Evan Woodbery from NOLA.com and the Times-Picayune, and Jude Young from SportsNOLA.com. Of course, your phone calls are welcome as well to the program. And let's get it kicked off. Jude, welcome back to the show, as always. Certainly appreciate you being with us. Tell the folks a little bit about SportsNOLA.com and what's going on there.
Well, first, it's always great to be here with you, Eric. And Eric and I are both part of the WGSO 990 AM radio family as well. I host a show, The Jude Young Show, from 6 to 7 on Tuesday and Wednesday nights. And my full-time duties as the main editor and webmaster at SportsNOLA.com keep me awfully busy as well. And certainly we keep our eye on the Saints heavily, yes. And there's plenty to talk about tonight. Great
website, guys. I've said it before. If you haven't checked it out, a lot of great local writers on that website. You ought to put it as one of your favorites. Evan Woodbery, welcome to the show. Your first time on the program. Thanks so much for being with us. Tell us a little bit about what's going on at NOLA.com.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. It's been coming off an extraordinarily busy March, probably the busier than I could have possibly anticipated, and I was expecting it to be a busy one. And we're heading into April. We're doing mock drafts, multiple ones each week leading up to the NFL draft, and I'll be up there in Chicago. So tons of draft coverage, and it seems like there's a real appetite because when you come off a losing season, there's a lot of talk about the future, and this is going to be an important draft for them.
Yep, no doubt. Of course, around here, football 365 days a year. Evan, before we kind of kick it off, tell folks a little bit about yourself. You're new to the city. You've been covering the Saints now, at least for a season. Tell the folks a little bit about where you came from and a little bit about what you're doing here in New Orleans.
Yeah, I started last July. Came in just a couple days before the start of training camp, so I came here, lived here for about 2 days in a hotel, and then went up to West Virginia for a month. But no, it's been a great first year. I covered the SEC before. I was at Knoxville covering Tennessee football. I covered Auburn football before that. Covered Alabama and South Carolina, so I was kind of making my way around the SEC circuit, but I'm in the NFL on an NFL beat, which I always wanted to do, and this has been a great place to start.
Right, you enjoy the NFL beat now?
Yeah.
Big difference between SEC and NFL?
The access is better. That's the thing I like better is, there's 4 open locker rooms a week during the season. You can talk to players. They're professionals, they're adults, they're not students. And so it gives it a different texture. There's more professionalism involved.
Yeah, no doubt. Let's kick it off. Let's talk first of all the owners' meeting last week. Sean Payton, Mickey Loomis finally met with the New Orleans media, met with the national media, and a lot was said during that those interviews. And Evan, I'll take you first. Your overall thoughts about what was said last week.
Well, I thought he was pretty frank about some of the moves and why they made them. The most interesting thing I thought Sean Payton said was just that they weren't going to make any move unless they felt confident in the replacement. And I kind of took that as a vote of confidence for Tim Lelito, who is obviously, as of today, slotted into one of the guard spots and replacing Ben Grubbs, although there's plenty of time until camp starts, but also a vote of confidence for Josh Hill at tight end and some other receiver options. Yeah. So, I thought that was interesting, and he was pretty frank about the changes and what they did.
Jude?
At this point of the offseason, you have to be confident if you're a team like the Saints that have done so much to change the look and the shape of the roster. So clearly I'm not surprised that Sean Payton and Mickey Loomis showed those votes of confidence to certain players who, in particular, you mentioned Josh Hill asked to step into a very big role, perhaps as a starter, the way things look right now. And it's very important to point out that Mickey Loomis's vote of confidence as far as Drew Brees, and we know he's not going anywhere, at least for this year anyway, because the Saints are rebuilding, but they're certainly doing it on the fly. It's going to take a good draft in order to perhaps be able to compete this year, but they're certainly trying, and we certainly had that feel from both Payton and Loomis.
I get the tight end. Josh Hill was emerging. Obviously, you got Ben Watson, who is a veteran guy. A little bit unknown in terms of Tim Lelito, but at times when he's had the opportunity to play, he's done well. Obviously, they didn't feel comfortable with him at the center position last year when he couldn't overtake Goodwin, who was clearly a descending player. I do wonder about the wide receiver position, though. Again, you move Kenny Stills, you got Shawntavius Jones, you got Brandon Coleman kind of in the background. One of the things that Stills he was kind of a speed guy that could kind of open up things downfield. I don't know if that guy's on this franchise right now, on this roster right now. So I am I do find it interesting about the wide receiver position, which makes me think that they're still in the market for a receiver and may go after one in the draft. Jude, your thoughts?
The wide receiver position is more important now as far as having definitive playmakers out there because the focal point of the passing game has been Jimmy Graham for the past few seasons. So is Brandon Cooks that guy? They certainly didn't use him much last year to stretch the field. He was a complete route tree type of receiver in college at Oregon State. We didn't see that from him last year. Many short routes, and certainly has a lot of talent as far as run after the catch, but I think he's going to be asked to use that vertical speed a bit more. And when you look at the roster right now, again, we're waiting for the draft. It looks like Cooks is going to have to be that guy because still surprised. He had great time speed, but he fell to be a fifth-round pick, for a reason, but he proved he could stretch the field a bit. Now Cooks has to step into that role because he's the only guy with experience that on the roster can do it.
Kevin?
Yeah, I think those are all great points, and especially about Jimmy Graham, how they're going to just by default going to have some other option to step up in the receiving game. I look at Nick Toon. This is going to be a huge chance for him. Mentioned Shantavius Jones and Brandon Coleman, two guys that they're very high on. But absolutely on paper, there's a lot of production loss with Kenny Stills, and you don't necessarily see Nick Toon as a guy that you can just trade in and trade out and make an even exchange on the depth chart there. So I think it has to be something that's at least looked at for the draft. But it's a position that probably wasn't a need a month ago, and after that, a couple of moves, it's a need today.
Jude, I would agree with you, and the first thing I thought was the same thing. Maybe they're going to put Cooks more on the outside. Maybe they're going to use him to be able to try to stretch defense with his speed. But traditionally, this team has used a receiver with speed as almost a decoy in some cases.
Right.
And you surely don't want to take away the playmaking ability of Brandon Cooks, who now seems to be a guy that's going to zero in on being one of the top guys, along with a C.J. Spiller catching the ball at the backfield. That's why I'm kind of leaning toward there's going to be something done either in the draft or that second wave of free agency where maybe they can get that Burner type, that Meacham, that Henderson type that we've seen traditionally in this offense.
With 3 of the top 44 picks in the draft, it's a very Sean Payton type thing to do, considering the Graham trade now, to expect something to happen at the wide receiver position. At this point, I would be shocked if they don't take somebody whose greatest asset is speed at the wide receiver spot with one of those 3 picks.
Right. And what's your thoughts on especially the first 3 picks? To me, I love Amari Cooper. I don't think Cooper will be there 13 if he happens to fall. You run to the podium and get him. But he's not that speed guy that we're talking about right now. But he is, again, an all-around receiver that has to be reckoned with in the NFL. What are your thoughts? Is it something they'll look at in the first 3 picks of the draft that they have, or is it something that maybe they'll look a little later, or maybe go with some of that after June 1st free agency?
Well, it could be all of the above. I think Amari Cooper is really interesting, but like you said, he's more of a kind of Marcus Colston Part 2 than he is, a new Brandon Cooks or a new Kenny Stills. But no, I think that it's going to be real interesting to see what they do with that first pick, because you've got the offensive guard, which was a hole. They added Max Unger. It could still be an issue where, if not for this year, for 2016, looking ahead to replace some of those veterans. Cornerback, they filled it with 2 key veterans recently. Is that still an issue that they're going to address? Then you go back to edge rusher, and there are a lot of options. If someone falls to him, if a Bud Dupree is there at 13, if a Randall Gregory is there at 13, maybe you have a hard time saying no to that. So yeah. I think they still have a lot of options, and it's a lot of it depends on what their internal evaluations for as far as what they think the needs are.
I've talked about it on my radio show or here on this television show as well. God, Lyle Collins just looks like the perfect pick for this team because you have an aging Jari Evans. You got a guy in Collins that can swing from tackle to guard if necessary. They love those swing guys. But, again, now you look at where they are, maybe it's not as much of a priority as maybe it was earlier, and maybe they look toward that edge rusher, especially with the problems that Junior Gillette is having right now.
You look at the roster, you look at the offensive line, and we're talking about Tim Melito, and we know there's been public praise about his potential there, but I'm still not buying that they wouldn't like to have another young guy come in and compete with him. I don't think that young guy is going to come at the 13th overall pick, even if Lyle Collins is there, because you talk about the value of a Collins. He could play left tackle. That's great and all, but they have a left tackle. Teron Armstead's not going anywhere. He's the left tackle of the present and the future. So with value early in the draft and Sean Payton's history with this team, you would think he would attack a playmaking position. And edge pass rusher is one of those playmaking positions in the NFL, and clearly wide receiver is as well.
Can't disagree with you, but the one thing that obviously he can do is swing between guard and tackle. And ultimately, you've got Zach Strief, who's aging, and you've got Jari Evans, who's aging, so maybe that's a fit. But I'm with you. I think
agree.
they go edge pass rusher because they're looking to be able to, again, get somebody that can make an immediate impact on this team and not a guy that may be sitting in the wings waiting for a season or so. Evan, what's your thoughts?
Well, I like the edge pass rusher because they're about 3 or 4 or 5 elite guys who are, at least one of whom is going to be there in the first round. So at their number 13 pick, they don't necessarily have to trade up unless they get, they just really want, say, Dante Fowler or somebody where they're going to have to trade up. But otherwise, they can sit tight with 13. You know, Bud Dupree could be there. Randall Gregory had the drug test problems. He could be there. There are other guys that could be there. So, you know, if they look at that edge rushing position as kind of a 3 or 4 guys where they all feel comfortable with one of those guys, getting one of those guys, they don't have to spend any picks to trade up. They can sit tight at 13 and kind of play it by ear. And, you know, for some of them, they could even trade down and pick up an extra pick, depending on how the draft shakes out.
Yeah, I'm with you. And Gregory's an interesting player because of the failed drug test. First of all, you got to be an idiot to be able to be smoking marijuana, understanding that's going to stay in your system, and knowing that you're going to a combine. So you're not a smart guy right there, first off. But the NFL is moving toward softening their stance on marijuana. So it'll be interesting to see what happens down the line in terms of where he goes. Will the Saints take a flyer on him, considering that right now it looks like they're purging a lot of the problems they feel they have in the locker room? Or again, is this guy such a can't-miss talent that if he's there sitting at 13 and he was projected to be maybe a top 5, top 10 pick, can the Saints not take a flyer on him?
Al Dupuis of SportsNola.com has done a draft report locally for decades. Great column from him yesterday pointing out the fact that he's not a can't-miss player. He focused in on Gregory's many weaknesses, such a raw talent. But when you have a raw talent who also doesn't make the smartest decisions off the field, 2 failed drug tests at Nebraska, now 1 at the Combine, that combination doesn't spell top half of the first round, particularly for the Saints, like you mentioned, that are trying to clean up the locker room a little bit.
Well, you know, you've said it is that the teams don't necessarily care that the players are smoking weed. They care that you're going to your biggest job interview of your life. You know you're going to be tested there, and you still fail the test. That doesn't speak well of your intelligence or your desire to play in the NFL. Sure. So that's a concern. But, you know, there are other guys that are character issues that could fall and be value picks. He's one of them. Dorial Green-Beckham was one of them. Marcus Peters, who they were checking out today at Washington, he's a guy that got kicked off the team. Tons of baggage there, but an incredible good athlete. So, you know, these are the decisions that teams have to weigh, risk versus reward, and he's one of them.
Those guys you mentioned make much more sense at 31 than they do at 13.
Right. Yeah,
Bottom
exactly.
of the first round, you can roll the dice on somebody. 13th overall, you really need to get it right.
Yeah, I'm with you. Evan, do you think they go in that direction with the purge that we've seen right now in the offseason? Do you think they take a flyer on a guy that might have some off-the-field issues?
My thought had always been no, and obviously I don't. You know, I've only been here a year, but based on what I've seen out of Sean Payton, I really didn't think they would go after a guy like, say, a Marcus Peters, who allegedly was in a confrontation with his coach that led him to get kicked off the team. But you know, if it becomes enough of a value pick, if a player falls far enough because of these incidents that have nothing to do with the play on the field, then you know, maybe you start thinking about it. But no, I think especially now, coming off a 7-9 season, after all this talk about leadership in the locker room, it probably would send a questionable message if you picked, certainly with a first pick, but even with your first handful of picks.
Yeah, I would agree. Jude, what can you add?
You know, you'd be stunned at this point if the Saints went with any of those 3 top picks with a corner at this point. They signed 2 veterans that they know that can play the game. They expect them to fill their roles. Browner across from Keenan Lewis, and clearly now Kyle Wilson, one of those guys who can do perhaps what a Patrick Robinson couldn't do. He's proven that he can be a steady, solid guy in the league. Ironically, he was drafted a few picks before Robinson in 2010, late in the first round. And he's not a spectacular player, but he can be the solid nickel corner that they also haven't had lately. They already have a project on the team, and his name's Stanley Jean-Baptiste. They haven't given up on him yet. Corner will be probably drafted, but I'd be shocked if it's middle rounds at the earliest at this point.
Your thoughts on Kyle Wilson?
Well, I think if you were penciling in the starting or the top nickel guy right now, he would be it. I think he'll get some competition in camp, and I wouldn't write it in pen just yet, but certainly pencil him in. But I think Jude is right about the way the draft fits is actually could work out well for the Saints because it's deep at cornerback, but it's deep at some of these little slot guys, not the big cornerbacks that are very much in vogue right now. Those are the guys that are going to go early, but the guys that'll be left in the 3rd or 4th or 5th round are some of these, these little 5'11" guys that are fast, that can play the slot, that can come in and provide depth on the Saints, maybe play a special teams role, or compete with Kyle Wilson for that slot job.
Yeah, and I got to believe that corner's got to be on their radar because at this point, how long do you think you can have a Brandon Browner playing at a high level? I mean, he's maybe a 1-2 year rental at the outside in terms of being able to have him on this team long term. So unless you really still believe in Stanley Jean-Baptiste, which again, I know the fan base definitely does not, then maybe you're looking at some point to try to say, maybe I got a guy that's going to come in nickel dime situations, but ultimately will be that guy that will be opposite Keenan Lewis at that corner position.
Skill set wise, Browner is the perfect mentor for Jean-Baptiste. They're so similar scouting report wise when you look back at Browner coming into the league to what Jean-Baptiste was last year, that it's not just scary, it's clearly smart by the front office to make a move like that. I think you're right. Corner is the value in the draft to the point where they're going to take one, and they're probably going to have a chance to have another guy who can be a good project, who can compete, but they don't have to, and they set themselves up to not have to worry about that particular position.
866-3200 is the phone number. Let's head to the phone lines. Chris is uptown. Chris, welcome to Inside New Orleans Sports. Hey, Chris.
Hey, what's up, guys?
How you doing, Chris?
All right. My question is, the Pelicans need another coach.
You may get your wish, Chris, before it's all said and done. 8 games left in the season, a game and a half behind Oklahoma City. And Jude and I were talking about this before we went on air today. When you look at the rest of the schedule, it just doesn't bode well for them to catch Oklahoma City unless you brought it up. Unless they seem to catch some of these teams that are in contention, that may ultimately be resting some players, maybe that saves Monty Williams' job. I'm of the opinion he's going to be judged on 5 years, not how many wins he got this season.
You would think so, and you're right about the schedule. They're a game behind in the loss column right now and a game and a half back of the Thunder. But you talked to me about it before the show. They're at Golden State coming up. They're at Portland. They still have Houston left. They may be very fortunate to play the Spurs in the last game of the regular season. I think they'll see a shell of the normal Spurs that you usually see. So if that game means something, advantage Pelicans. But the caller is part of a growing crowd that feels like Monty Williams is part of the problem and not solution. But again, we've talked about on the show before, once we get to that point and the Pelicans are or are not in the playoffs, let's say they don't make it as we expect, I think when the offseason comes, you have to have a general manager who knows that he has a coach he can work with. And I don't believe right now that there's any more confidence in the building, or maybe even less if you believe some leaks and reports, in Demps compared to Monty Williams. I don't think they're going to hire a coach with this GM if they were to make a change. It's probably a 2-for-1 deal.
You know, it's interesting, Evan, John Reed was on my radio show yesterday, and one of the things he talked about was the fact that the one telling thing that we're seeing right now is no vote of confidence for Monty Williams. Normally, you get a situation where you got a coach that is winning right now more games than we've seen over the last couple seasons. He's on the cusp of the playoffs. Normally, you get a little bit of vote of confidence. We're not seeing that.
No, we're not. And the thing that I think is interesting about this final stretch run, Brian Anderson returned from his latest injury last night and helped out against the Lakers. He's going to be important down the stretch. Is Drew Holiday going to make it back on the floor? I really think Dell Demps needs his team on the floor, and Monty Williams does too, so he can be fully evaluated, so that if this team, if healthy enough, can make a good run at it down the stretch, that would certainly help both of them. And at this point, if those guys aren't there, it's hard to see them winning out, and perhaps that's a crutch they can lean on a little while longer. Holiday and Anderson in particular are so important based on the current makeup of the roster, and they've both been hurt the last two seasons.
I certainly hope not. I think that the injury situation has been played out. Every single team in the NBA has injuries. The team in front of them, the Oklahoma City Thunder, has been decimated by injuries, and they've still been able to overcome. And I surely would not bring Drew Holiday back at this late date. At this point, shut him down. What is he going to do? Unless you get into the playoffs, there's no reason to bring him back.
Find out what you have in Tyreek Evans. See if he can lead you down the stretch and win big games, because we've talked about this on the show before. I know you've talked about it on yours. I have on mine individually. Tyreek Evans, Drew Holiday, and the current salary structure, there's no way those two fit together if you're going to fill your other needs, be better on the wings with length that you need, and to be able to re-sign a guy like Omer Asik, figure out what you're going to do with Alexei Yazhenko moving forward. Lots to do for the next couple of years, which are so important. When Anthony Davis looks like he's going to be the very best player in the league, you can't waste this time.
Yes, as good of a player that Drew Holiday is right now, and especially defensively, which is his prowess, especially matching up against other guards, where again that is not Tyreek's strong suit. No. He's damaged goods right now. I don't know what you can get for a Holiday on the open market right now because of the stress fracture problem for the last 2 seasons. So I think they're kind of in a holding pattern there. Let's head back to the phone lines. Hayward is in New Orleans. Hayward, welcome to Inside New Orleans Sports.
Hey, how you doing?
Hey, Hayward.
All right, 3 quick questions. We got like about 4 or 5 corners because we just picked up a corner from the Jets. And why did not bring it back? No one picked up Pierre, so why are they not interested in bringing Pierre Thomas back? And my last question is, since we got all this, why are we not going after linebackers? That's my question, and I'll listen.
Evan, the cornerback situation, is, I think we talked about, I don't think they're done, but I think they're trying to collect as many pieces as they can in terms of the corners.
Right, and it's worth remembering just from a roster number standpoint, they gained 2, but they also lost 2 in Patrick Robinson going elsewhere and Corey White, who is a corner safety type being claimed on waivers as well. So, I mean, just from a strictly numbers standpoint, you got 90 guys on the roster going into camp. You need a certain number of cornerbacks, and they're not there yet. So they're going to need to add more, whether it's through a cheap option in free agency or probably through just one or more for the draft. But I was interesting that he mentioned Pierre Thomas at running back. Because he was actually in the news today because he was visiting or talking to the Washington Redskins. Sounds like they're going to wait until after the draft to see where they are. And I don't get the sense there's a whole lot of market for him. Yeah. But from Pierre's standpoint, I mean, there's obviously not a real role for him left with the Saints anymore. So it makes sense for him to look around the league to try to find the place where he can fit and actually have a better chance of making the roster. Because right now, that's probably not the case for the Saints.
Yeah. And once they signed Spiller, I figured that was that again, as much as I thought Pierre may come at a very cheap price for the team just to finish his career out, play another season. Once Spiller came on board, I think that kind of was the death note for him. What about that linebacker position? What do you think? At this point, they've only really made one significant move to bring in a linebacker, but I think that's something that they're going to look at in post-draft free agency and also possibly in the draft as well.
Yeah, I think you're right, and they like Donnell Ellerbe, who they picked up in the Kenny Stills trade. Whether that's an upgrade or a small upgrade or not an upgrade at all over having Curtis Lofton there remains to be seen. And I think the jury's probably still out on that. But no, that's an issue. When I go through the mock drafts, I think finding a linebacker type that can at the very least provide some depth and hopefully take a step further and play some real snaps on defense. There's a little cluster of, say, the Denzel Perrymans and the Stephon Anthonys and Bernardrick McKinney at Mississippi State. They're all ranked fairly similar, and they're kind of in that second round-ish category. And that might make sense for the Saints to try to grab one of those guys to just fill out some depth.
Perfect spot for them to maybe look at 31. If they like one of those linebackers and it's close, you got to pick at 13 in the second round, maybe looking to trade back, pick up additional picks.
They've got the ability to be so flexible here with the draft, moving up and down in different spots. The linebackers that we've talked about here are guys that could be a reach perhaps at 31, but perfect at 44. But scheme and fit means so much. And we know the Saints at the Pro Day for Miami were certainly interested in Perriman. They had dinner with him.
Sure seemed like it, right?
Right, and we talked about speed receiver. They like Philip Dorsett to perhaps fill that role that we were talking about. So those are 31 or 44. type guys. And I think the Saints are going to strike at those two spots more than likely, a linebacker and more of the interior linebacker. We've talked about it. It sure seems like edge rusher, they're going to have to take the best one available or move up if they're enamored with a guy at 13. Don't be surprised, though, when it's all said and done that two linebackers, one outside, one inside, wound up being amongst those three picks because it makes sense. And again, because of what they've done at corner in free agency, they've set themselves up to attack those areas.
Right. Pierre Thomas, your thoughts?
Pierre Thomas is looking for a place where he can play. He still feels like he can contribute somewhere, and I think he'll hang around and wind up getting an opportunity. He's hoping to be with a contender, clearly, but I don't think the Saints have shut the door on him. If he can't find a job, I'm sure the Saints said, anytime you want to come back for the minimum, we'll take you back, but Pierre's hoping for a little better than that, probably something with incentives. And let's just hope he doesn't show up in the NFC South. I don't want to see him with a rival of the Saints because the guy can still play and be a difference maker.
Yeah, I think the biggest problem, and Evan, I don't know if you would agree with this, last year was the inability to get on the field, stay on the field with him. I mean, it wasn't a skill set, it wasn't his ability to be able to run or catch passes when he was healthy. It was, again, it took a little bit longer for him to heal up than we've seen in the past with Pierre Thomas.
Yeah, and you're right, and I think they probably looked at his age and looked at the money they were investing in a player that age and said in this current salary cap climate, it just didn't make sense for him.
Yes. Back to the phone lines we go, 866-3200. Peter is uptown. Peter, welcome to Inside New Orleans Sports.
Thanks for taking my call, Larry.
Thank you for calling.
There's one other thing that will clinch the departure of Dell Demps and Monty Williams, and that is when you look at the games on television, the amount of empty seats is noticeable. And that means that when the season ticket renewals come in, and they're significantly decreased, which they certainly will be, the management will notice, and they are interested in green. It's the only color they're interested in, and they're not going to stand for decreased revenue, decreased season ticket holders, and the like. And the answer to that is certainly to make a wholesale change to get rid of Dell Demps and Monty Williams. And I'll hang up and listen to your call, your comments.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think that this particular offseason is going to be fueled ultimately by the number of people who are interested in renewing their tickets, and they need to have a splash. They need to get people excited about this franchise again. They've got Anthony Davis, a budding superstar, but yet they can't fill the arena. Again, the other night, Zephyr Field was packed with baseball fans that were out seeing LSU play. I had a conversation the other day with Jordy Hultberg, former LSU great, on my radio show, and we reminisced about the times when LSU would come down here and play basketball, and the arena would be packed. So they got to do something to energize the fan base. Just Anthony Davis right now doesn't seem it's enough, because I think that they've given up on this regime and given up on this coach.
I just don't think that you're going to energize the fan base with anything but winning, and that includes what kind of coach you hire. We've heard rumors of, could it be a Joe Dumars, Avery Johnson combination, and you, quote, go local? That's not going to put fannies in the seats. They just need to win. This is a basketball franchise that needs a bandwagon, and even having right now Anthony Davis playing some of the best basketball you've ever seen at the power forward spot at a young age, that's still not helping from what we're getting a feel of so far right now, the stretch run for renewals for these season tickets. That's happening right now. The Pelicans are going to have their answer about where they stand very early in the offseason. If they're declining in sales with Anthony Davis on the roster, even though they're going to wind up being improved by maybe 10 wins this year, that tells you everything you need to know about the pressure to try to start winning.
Larry's in New Orleans East. Larry, welcome to Inside New Orleans Sports. Hey, Larry.
Yep. Hello.
Welcome to the show.
Hey, this is Carl. How you doing?
Hey, Carl. How you doing?
I'm okay. Hey, I have two full questions. From what I've watched the Pelicans, the few games I've watched, is it my imagination, or it looks like Omar Asik makes the offense stagnant, and it looks like he's better suited to come off the bench? Mm-hmm. And secondly, with the Saints, for his first round draft picks, do you see the Saints taking Devontae Parker from Louisville or Jalen Strong from Arizona State with maybe the 31st pick?
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate the phone call. Evan, why don't you take the Saints question first?
Well, I mean, I think those are, names that you've heard thrown about. It's, again, I do feel like that, there is some sort of consensus that they're probably with that first pick going to go with an edge rusher, either trading up if they're really smitten with one guy or just sitting tight and seeing who falls into their lap at that spot. The number 31, I think, is you could go a lot of different directions, and I think that's still more up in the air. And I think, a lot of it is, where it shakes out in the draft. With the edge rushers, we talk about them early because there's handful of elite ones and then a drop off. Not every position is like that, and I think that's kind of how they're going to juggle it.
Right. A little bit high for maybe those two players at 31?
Probably so, and we'll see. I haven't checked the latest mock drafts, but when I was checking some this morning, there were a few fluctuations that raised eyebrows. So, it's probably a tad ambitious for both those guys, but we'll see how it shakes out.
I hate I mean, Parker's going to be gone before 31. It's a matter of where he's going to go anywhere, maybe from as high as you're looking at 12 with Cleveland needing a receiver. And maybe you look at, if he were to fall to, I believe 20 is Philadelphia, and we know that they've made some moves at that spot and could use a potential number one guy. Parker's not going to be there at 31. It's a matter of, is he really in the Saints bullpen at 13? Strong is another receiver whose strengths, no pun intended, fall more along of a big receiver that the Saints feel like they have the combination of veterans and young guys in-house. So I don't think he's the type of player they'd be looking at 31. We're just guessing at this point.
Sure. What about Sheik?
When you watch the way they use him offensively, I mean, he's not going to be a guy who's you really want the ball to come in his hands. I don't like to see him come out and touch the basketball, foul line extended. I'm no expert when it comes to the X's and O's of the game, but that's another area where you question Monty Williams when he's in the game. Would he be better served perhaps setting screens away from the basketball, working the baseline, and then looking for rebounds? Don't bring him out to touch the ball. Sure, Ajinka's done well offensively because he fits that scheme a little better.
That's his skill set.
What was the big free agent, or in this case, trade acquisition of the past offseason? Bringing him a seat, not just so that he could help you on the defensive end, but he's got to fit in on the other end of the floor, too. So that's another one of those Monty Williams area where you scratch your head. Sean
Vazan said it on this program, and he was so right. And again, if you concentrate on it, you see it. Sheik should never be in a situation where he's on the high pick and roll because he can't catch the basketball.
Right.
And again, it stagnates the offense. Now, I will say, down the stretch, he's been better. Hands better, the ability to be able to finish around the basket a little bit better. You've never could question his rebounding prowess or his ability to be able to take up space as a space eater, as a center. But just in terms of his athleticism, fluidity, again, it leaves a little bit to be desired. And on the flip side, you got Agenza, who is a guy that's making less than $1 million, who now is playing very, very well. And the Pelicans may be hard-pressed to be able to hold on to him now.
And who's going to be making those decisions? It keeps coming back to that. Who's shaping the roster, and for what coach is he shaping it for?
You're watching Inside New Orleans Sports each and every Thursday night right here on WLAE TV with our live broadcast at 6 p.m. Every Friday night you can catch us on Pelican Sports Television in New Orleans, Baton Rouge, and Lafayette, 9 p.m. And, of course, right back here on WLAE at 10 p.m. each and every Friday night. Evan Woodbery, beat writer for the New Orleans Saints for the NOLA.com, the Times-Picayune, and also Jude Young of SportsNOLA.com are our guests. We'll take a quick break. We'll be right back. We'll go right back to the phone lines. You're watching Inside New Orleans Sports.
Inside New Orleans Sports with Eric Asher is underwritten by...
Located on Lake Pontchartrain, Brisbee's Lakefront Restaurant and Bar offers traditional West End favorites, a scenic view, oysters, and numerous tasty options. More information is available at 504-304-4125 or brisbeesrestaurant.com. Mr. Ed's Oyster Bar and Fish House has been shucking here since 1979. Located at 3117 21st Street in Metairie, Mr. Ed's Oyster Bar and Fish House offers raw, fried, and grilled oysters as well as a range of Cajun and Creole dishes. Enjoy a dozen with a smile. WLAE is currently looking for partners to underwrite this program and other programs on our station. Underwriting on WLAE is affordable, brings exposure to your cause or company, and helps support our nonprofit mission of providing television programs that educate, inform, and inspire the viewers of Greater New Orleans and Southeast Louisiana. If you are interested in learning about program underwriting on WLAE, please contact us at 504-830-3703.
Welcome back to Inside New Orleans Sports. I'm your host, Eric Asher. Evan Woodbery and Jude Young are on our panel tonight. 866-3200 is the phone number. Back to the phone lines we go. Thomas is in New Orleans. Thomas, welcome to Inside New Orleans Sports. Hey, Thomas.
My question is, I feel like everybody is putting the blame on the secondary and the linebackers. I feel like the big problem is the defensive line. More than enough time to sit back there and pick them apart. And I feel like at 13, that's why the Saints should go after my favorite player in the draft, Danny Shelton or Vic Beasley at 13. And I just want to know y'all opinion.
Thomas, thanks for the phone call. Man, Shelton looks like he's a top 5 pick right now, at least in most mock drafts that I've seen. Beasley maybe a top 10 guy. Jude, I'll take you first. Your thoughts?
I think Shelton blew people away today from what I heard at the pro day at the University of Washington. So chances are he won't be available but if he were, you think the Saints would run up to the podium because he has the special ability perhaps to play anywhere and any role on the line with his size and physical ability. Beasley's been mocked to the Saints a lot, but moving up the draft boards. Again, the draft boards aren't the boards in the rooms of these 32 teams, but Beasley may be the very best fit out of those guys with his versatility. Somebody that could line up opposite of Junior Galette, not just be a good edge pass rusher. They talked to Anthony Spencer earlier in the offseason. You'd love the Spencer from the Cowboys of a few years ago when he was healthy. And remember, he was the bookend to DeMarcus Ware. If they're moving forward with Junior Galette, I'm still not 100% sold on that. But if they are, they need somebody who can play more of the strong side in sets and be more versatile. Beasley would be a great pick.
Right. Well, and the possibility of a 6-game suspension for Galette is looming out there. So you may have to go into this draft and the second part of free agency knowing that, you know what, you need somebody in that spot because he may not be around for 6 games. Evan, what can you add?
Well, I think it'll be interesting to see how they use Junior Galette because I would say the last 3 or 4 games or so of last season, he was in a much more limited role. He was out there on pass rush situations and honestly seemed to do a lot better when he could just focus on rushing the passer. But ideally, a guy you're paying that much money, you probably want to be an every down guy. So, presumably if they get an elite type lineman, you look for an every down type guy and maybe continue to use Galette in a pass rushing role. I'd be curious to see how they use an Alex Shelton because I think, Danny Shelton, because I think you'd have to kind of have a plan going in for how you want to use him. But we don't talk enough about it, and we being me and our chats and mock drafts and such, but they do need defensive linemen, just from a strict numbers standpoint, getting guys in camp. They lost Brandon Dedrick. I could see them going after another kind of 1-year veteran type guy to come in and play a versatile role, but it's a position that has to be addressed.
Right. Guys, to me, I agree with Thomas, the most disappointing position last season. You looked at one of the reasons why people had the Saints going to the Super Bowl. One of the reasons why I thought that they were a Super Bowl contender is this young, aggressive defensive line. Akeem Hicks did not play up to his potential. Jenkins did not play up to his potential. Neither Jordan or Galette played up to their potential. And now you're kind of in an unknown situation on, okay, 2 years ago, was this the type of player that we're going to be getting for the rest of their career, or was it last year as the type of player we're going to get going long term? And I don't even know if the coaches know that yet.
They can't because they thought, like we thought, that the strength of the defense was going to be those young players up front, that the people you mentioned were going to take a step forward. Now, Jenkins, we know, John Jenkins had that pec injury in the offseason, and he was always going to be an issue with him with his weight and fitness, and that had a big effect. So we'll give him a pass and see if he bounces back. But Akeem Hicks did not, technique-wise, make those steps he needed to, not to play so high and neutralize himself. The Cam Jordan thing, though, is such a surprise. When you look back on it, it's such a head-scratcher that he didn't take that next step forward. We thought that this offseason, a priority was going to be for the Saints to lock him up long-term. Now they're playing a wait-and-see because they just don't know with him. And I do believe those rumors that he, like many on the roster, was up for grabs, so to speak, with other teams calling to ask about trades. And he may still be if they were to go with one of those type of linemen, like a Shelton who would fall to 13, then maybe Jordan becomes a trade situation to get a need filled someplace else.
Well, especially with $6.9 million against the cap this year. It's one of the reasons why I was surprised that they talked about that they're trying to extend him. I don't get it from Jordan's standpoint. You're a unrestricted free agent next year. You get an opportunity to get on the open market to see what you're worth. At this point, you're making a pretty decent salary, $6.9 million. You know, if you're Jordan, unless they're going to just wow you with a contract, and I don't know why the Saints would do that, especially after the Junior Gillette experiment. You got to wonder again. This would be simply a cap move, and why would you extend? Why would you extend or want to be extended? Your thoughts on the defensive line as a whole, and also Junior Gillette. I'm sorry, Cam Jordan.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I don't know that the Saints have a whole lot of leverage from a contract standpoint, unless in the sense that, you know, assuming that Cam Jordan is confident in his ability to bounce back and have a big 2015, he can go on the market as a very attractive free agent after this season. The only leverage then the Saints would have to be to franchise him, and the franchise number for a guy at his position, I think, was in the $14 million range. This year, it'll be even a little bit higher next year. So I don't see that as a realistic option either. So that's if you're looking for reasons why he might have a bounce back year, that's as good a reason as any. It will determine how much money he makes, what kind of contract he signs, where he goes, all those things. So, you know, he'll be having a lot to play for beyond just wins and losses.
Yeah, and as disappointed as I was in Junior Gillette and Cam Jordan, I was equally disappointed in Akeem Hicks. I can't tell you how many times I went back and looked at the games frame by frame, and I would see Akeem Hicks totally turned around in the middle of the defense, or 2 to 3 yards off the ball instead of 2 to 3 yards in the interior of the offensive line. Big things were expected of him, and he didn't come through for him last season.
Yeah, and it was perplexing, and that's probably one of the biggest questions I got in my first year on the beat is the why, and I don't know that I ever had a good answer or that the coaches had a good answer, but you know, the original caller was asking about, or was mentioning that too much blame was placed on the secondary versus the defensive line, but it's kind of a chicken or the egg issue because a really good cover secondary can make the defensive line look so much better and make their sacks a lot easier, and vice versa. The defensive line pressure can make the secondary's job so much easier and force interceptions and make them look better. So, you know, it may have been both, and those their weaknesses and their struggles kind of fed off each other and created what we saw last year.
Well, they were so confident in this defensive line. That's why they went out and spent a king's ransom on Jarvis Byrd.
Again, in that we don't know how that's going to move's going to work out, but we certainly weren't against it as the local media was when we saw it. We thought, hey, this is a playmaker at the back end. It makes perfect sense. You're upgrading from Malcolm Jenkins. Jenkins was not only healthy but played his best football in the pros with Philly last year. So you just never know. But again, when you look at the situation up front and going back to Hicks, perhaps he has to play more outside. Perhaps he needs to be a strong side end more in the mold of Cam Jordan. Maybe that makes Jordan even more expendable. The Saints are really trying to figure that out now and moving forward, and they may have to take another year to look at both of these guys as they get closer to being free agents and figure out where they can fit if they do at all. Again, what a difference a year makes with all of these guys up front, because a strength is turned into as big a question mark as you can have when you have talent in the building at a particular spot.
You know, it's amazing when you look at the cap situation of this team now as opposed to where they were. You know, was it $24 million in dead money right now? They don't have a tremendous amount of wiggle room on who they can go to and ask them to restructure, take a pay cut, etc. Jari Evans, again, is now, we believe, either restructured. We don't know if it's a pay cut or not. We don't know what the terms of the extension is at this point. But now he's been extended a third year, so he's got 3 more years left with the Saints. He'll be 35 years old by the time this contract is up. Possibly a salary dump in the last year of that deal, considering you've gotten rid of so much dead money at this point. You probably won't have the type of dead money you'll have in 2017. Evan, your thoughts on Evans and his situation, and I guess the situation that we're dealing with right now in terms of the salary cap.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There aren't many options left to go to find cuts, and I assume it's a pretty significant, at the least, a salary cap burden reduced for Jari Evans, and it probably included a pretty hefty pay cut, although we probably won't find out the numbers until next week because of the holiday. But after that, there really aren't many other options. You've got Cam Jordan at about $6.9 million. But you could convert that to a signing bonus, but you can't push it down the road because he's a free agent after this year. So it would have to come in the context of an extension to get any kind of salary cap relief there. And after that, there really aren't any other obvious options. I mean,
they're tapped out.
Yeah, they can do some strategic
Thomas
shifting here and there.
the only guy that might be, because again, a punter. He's been a great kickoff specialist for him. He would be a guy that maybe you can extend. Okay, but his cap hit's like $2 million, so you don't have a lot of room.
Well, we've railed on the special teams, particularly the coverage units and the inconsistency there over the years. And when we watched Darren Sproles have great success in another system as a return man, it made us think perhaps he wasn't the problem when he looked to be slowing down in that department. So if you have a great punter at the very least and kickoff man, you can cover up a lot of deficiencies in those areas. I don't think the Saints want to do that. I think he's definitely a last resort guy. And I want to get back to the point about Evans that I thought was interesting and why it made sense if you believe in third-party sites that scout the NFL with the numbers. And last year, he was a very good run blocker. He actually struggled in pass blocking, which of course should be the key when you're pass blocking for Drew Brees. But I think it's exciting that perhaps the Saints are saying we might look a lot more like the 2006 Saints offense than the 2009 offense. That offense fed the ball to Deuce McAllister, had the complimentary back in Reggie Bush who could catch it and be a threat in the slot and be a one-on-one nightmare. Now they've re-signed Mark Ingram. They've made a commitment to him. He's going to be asked to carry more of the load, and we know that he's better the more he touches the ball. C.J. Spiller trying to fill the Reggie Bush role. Maybe it works where they're going to look to run the football more, and the end of the Drew Brees days of throwing over 5,000 yards, he just missed it this year. His numbers may go down, and the efficiency and the ability of the offense to get the job done might go up as a result.
Evan, touch on that. Your thoughts?
Well, I would agree that even go a step further when we're talking about the offensive line, as they made a concerted effort to go out and get an elite center.
Right.
And I think part of their thinking is that an upgrade at center will make the guard position better. And I think it was clear they couldn't keep Jari Evans and Ben Grubbs, that one had to go. And I think, obviously it was made more convenient because Jari was open to a renegotiation. It looked like Ben was kind of calling their bluff and forced the trade. But I think they also made the decision that if it was everything was equal, they were going to stick with Jari, that was their preference at that, just keeping one of those guards. So, I think they're optimistic for an upgrade on the offensive line that's going to help with Unger and kind of trickle out from the center position.
Yeah, especially bringing in somebody who obviously is young and really inexperienced in a guy like Lito as well. Having that veteran presence next to him means a lot in terms of Unger. You talked about analytics. I want to talk a little bit about Drew Brees right now. Obviously, we can put it to bed. Drew Brees is not going anywhere. This team is trying to build around Drew Brees for maybe the next 3 or so seasons. It kind of makes sense when you look at the cap hit this year, the cap hit next year, that again they would extend him down the line here to try to open up, especially next year, some cap room. He's not going to be a $20 million contract in a quarterback in this next contract, so I'm interested to see where they are there. But I read something within the last couple of days that said under pressure last year, Brees was one of the most prolific passers in the league. First of all, your thoughts on Brees, where he is in his career right now, and do you see him being extended past next season?
Well, I think that'll be an easier question to answer next offseason, because if they go, if it's a disaster year and they go 3-13, all bets are off. That's when I think you do say, okay, we're going to blow up the roster and just start over again. But I don't see that happening, and I think they're very much on board for contending in 2015 and 2016. And then we've got kind of a model in the NFL of these relatively old quarterbacks who are sort of almost going on year-to-year contracts, usually at a pretty high level. But I see the Saints will have that ability with him through the franchise tag if they want to go that route. They can try to negotiate a longer term if they want to. It's so much of it depends on where Drew Brees stands after the 2016 season physically. Is he pretty much the Drew Brees that he is today? Has he declined a bit in those 2 seasons? And that's tough to say, and that's one of the reasons, I don't know that either side was eager for an extension right now, just because there are so many uncertainties to come. But I do know that if Drew Brees went on the free agent market right now at this moment, there'd be teams lining up to dump money on his driveway just because you saw what some really bad quarterbacks got paid during this offseason.
Yes. Right. There's just not really a lot of great quarterbacks in the NFL, and he's still got some tread left on the tires. And I'm with you. I think they take that wait-and-see attitude. They want to see how he's going to perform now with a better offensive line, at least on paper. And they want to see, again, if he can continue to be the top-notch player that he has been. And, we heard Peyton talk about it at the owners' meeting. The guy, and it's true, the guy as a workout warrior, takes care of himself. So when you look at the number of what his age is, he probably isn't that. But Jude, he's taken a tremendous amount of hits over the last 2 seasons.
He has, but he's still been efficient and done a fine job. People are misjudging the situation a little bit if they think the Saints should be eager to start looking to move on. Now, after this season, I think with that last year of a contract, how this year goes, how he plays, all bets are off. We don't know what's going to happen then. But the Drew Brees of this past year was still a top 4 or 5 quarterback in the NFL. Just because he's not in the conversation to be the very best anymore, there are a lot of teams that you mentioned are struggling to find quarterbacks. The free agent class this year was terrible. Next year's looks to be just as bad. Drew Brees is still a valuable commodity. The Saints can win a Super Bowl with him, but if they're leaning on him so much, having him take so many hits, the defense is struggling, they're not winning the field position battle, all those things working against Drew Brees, he's not going to take you to the promised land, and guess what? Neither is Tom Brady, neither is Peyton Manning, et cetera, et cetera.
You know, interesting about the wide receiver position now, because one of the things Drew could lean on is guys that understood the concepts in the offense. They were always for the most part, where they were supposed to be. Drew could count on Moore being at a certain place, Thomas being at a certain place, Colson being at a certain place within that route tree. You got to bring in some younger guys now who may not be as disciplined as those veteran receivers that he was used to. So there's going to be a little bit of reacquainting themselves with these young guys coming in, and be interested to see how quickly they get it so that Brees can lean on them. You know, you're not going to have that big target now like you had in Jimmy Graham before, so you may see a little bit more of that dump off like we saw with Reggie Bush, like we saw with Darren Sproles. Spiller may be a big part of this offense.
Yeah, I'm really eager to see what the Saints and Sean Payton can do with C.J. Spiller, because you know, he's a guy that was probably underutilized with Buffalo.
Agreed.
And I think, you know, when you have a really offensive genius type coach, I think it's going to be exciting to see what he can do with that talent.
Jude, what can you add?
I just believe that the offense is being tailor-made towards mid-30s Drew Brees, and very well, I might add, and he's going to have a solid season. It may not be enough with all the other changes they need to make, but I don't think people are going to be disappointed with Drew Brees. And the Saints, at the very least, are going to have an asset, if he stays healthy, next offseason, if all the other moves aren't working out. And keep this in mind. Yes, Drew Brees is synonymous with the New Orleans Saints now. He's a legend, and he always will be. But we saw Brett Favre play for other teams. We've seen Peyton Manning move on from the Colts. And Drew Brees, as long as he's playing and working that hard to be in the best shape of his life and to be an elite quarterback, also wants to have a chance to win. If the Saints are looking at more of a full-blown rebuild next offseason, he's going to be as eager to go as the Saints are going to be as desperate to get assets for him and send him off.
You know, even in a time where you didn't see guys that were the faces of the franchise being moved, long before you guys were here, Archie Manning was moved from this team. And again, that was thought to be a sacrilege back then. Back to the phone lines we go. To Uptown New Orleans and Matt. Matt, welcome to Inside New Orleans Sports.
Yeah.
Hey, Matt.
Hello?
Hey, Matt, welcome to the show.
Yeah, this Mac. Yeah, I just had 3 things that I think that can probably do good for the Pelicans. You may have already mentioned them. Just get the tail end of y'all's show. But the 3 things that I'm looking at, especially in particular, is that they need to really change the hold on, slow up my TV down.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, it's the change of the general manager, the coach, and also get some players that can support this young player that we have, Anthony Davis. He really needs a lot of support because, as you can see, as time as the team keeps playing the way they are, eventually this young guy is going to wind up there one day and go to a real competitive team. And you know he's going to probably get the money, especially if you don't have the problems with, physical and injuries, conditions, and stuff like that. So I just wanted to see, if you had a comment on that or not. That's what I think that would probably put a fire under the team and most of all for the fan base too.
Yeah.
Thanks
for the phone call. We've kind of addressed it, Jude. This kind of is the really a defining moment for this franchise for Dell Demps and for Monty Williams.
Well, Inside New Orleans Sports tonight has been a referendum, hasn't it? We've mentioned this is a team that has improved this year, is going to have a winning record, probably be 10 or so games better. They have a great player. They've had moments of brilliance this year, and everybody's calling in, brings up Demps and Williams and wants them gone. That's not a very good sign for their job security because, like we mentioned, it's behinds in the seats that are going to tell the tale as a tiebreaker for what's going to happen this offseason.
Let me ask you this. As a newcomer here that didn't follow the last couple of years of the Pelicans, what were the expectations coming in this year? I mean, are they a few wins below? I mean, were they pretty much a bubble playoff team going in?
I think it was playoffs or bust.
Playoffs or
honestly, I really do. I think when you got 5 years of regime, you got a coach that's under four, that is a 400 win percentage coach. You've got a GM that again has made some moves. Some will say, as Jude said, duplicate moves on this franchise. Much like the Saints, the Pelicans are cash strapped as well in terms of the cap. They're right up against the cap. They don't have a lot of wiggle room. So I think the expectation has been this season with Anthony Davis, with this full complement of players that again you brought in last season that were injured, that you have to make the playoffs. And again, I think that is the defining situation for both of these guys. They overtake OKC, they get another year. Both are under contract for another season. They don't, they're probably let go.
And it's not about entertainment either. It's about winning. But the problem is this roster has been built to play at pace, and you have a head coach who wants to slow things down and thinks that he can win with defense. This team is not good close and late defensively, as they should be for a head coach who has that game plan, and they don't run the floor enough. Anthony Davis was made to run the floor. You've got all these guys, these guards, this excess of guards, and they're all at their best when they're in transition, and this is a team that slows down. And that doesn't make any sense to the average fan, and it really doesn't make any sense to the analyst. And you're seeing it louder and louder. Watch social media.
Oh, no.
The real people who follow the NBA closely, whose opinions I respect for watching so many games, they rail on Monty Williams and his game plan.
No, I would agree. And as far as the ability to be able to surround AD with other players, man, they're up against the cap. They've got to move some players. And right now, some of the players that they would have to move, the Ryan Andersons, the Drew Holiday, they're damaged goods.
Right.
So you're really in a really tough spot. Got about 2 minutes left. Quickly, 1 minute from both of you. Evan, I'll take you first. Your thoughts overall on how the Saints have done in the offseason. Are they doing well, not so well, or again, they still have some work to do?
I think they still have some work to do, and if we thought the draft was going to be important before all this happened, I think it's even more important now. You look at last year's draft; they got one impact player in Brandon Cooks, and that was great. But you probably would have liked 2 or 3 impact players. I think you need at least 2 in this draft. With 2 first-round picks, with 5 in the first 80, you'd like to have 3 impact players, guys that are just not going to be role players, just not going to be special teamers, but are going to make a difference. And I think based on some of the holes they have, that's what they need to get out of this draft, and that's why it's going to be an important month to watch.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think it's an incomplete right now until we see what they're able to do with this draft. Jude?
I'm impressed with their aggressiveness. I'm impressed with the way they're trying to reshape the locker room and accumulate draft picks for once. I've always called the draft like having a dartboard. The more picks you have, they're like darts. The more likely you're going to hit bullseyes. And it looks like the Saints are going to attack this draft to fill many needs with young players and try to hit a few more bullseyes because they need to, obviously, with the salary cap situation. But getting younger and rebuilding on the fly should be the game plan. And so far, I really like the moves, and I think they're going to have a much more harmonious locker room the way things look right now.
Jude Young of SportsNola.com, Evan Woodbery of NOLA.com. Thanks so much for being on our panel tonight. Thanks so much for watching Inside New Orleans Sports. Remember, there's a rebroadcast of this program each and every Friday night right here on WLAE TV at 10 p.m. And now a new time on Pelican Sports Television in New Orleans, Baton Rouge, and Lafayette, 9 p.m. each and every Friday night. Don't forget, you can catch me on the radio, 9:90 a.m. WGSO, weekdays 11 a.m. until 1 p.m. You can also check us out on the TuneIn Radio app, as well as you can listen live, download the podcast at ericasher.com. If you've missed any of the previous episodes of Inside New Orleans Sports, all those episodes are available at ericasher.com as well. Again, special thanks to our guests, Evan Woodbery and Jude Young. Also to the WLAE production staff, including Ron Yeager, Jim Dotson, also Philip Williamson, Amanda Lyons, Naila Jones, and Richard King, and also my director, William Hill. Everyone have a happy holiday, and we'll see you right back here next Thursday night for Inside New Orleans Sports. Now we go live to St. Louis Cathedral for Holy Thursday Mass.